We're going to talk about the big bad ghost of Paris. Now, the Louvre, originally when we started the tour, we'd walk all the way down there, go to the courtyard, and it would take 2 hours. It's amazing how far that is. Now, the story I'm about to tell you has many variations, but this is the collective story that I've been able to find in all the French literature. Now, let's go back to the time of Catherine de Medicis. She was basically ruler for about 3 kings. She went through 3 kings, her son and 2 husbands, and she was called the Black Queen because evidently she was doing black masses in the basement of the Louvre and doing all sorts of weird sorcery. And something was occurring at the time because this was the 16th century and the printing press was just invented. And guess what comes out with the printing press? Tabloids. And she was the subject of some of the worst tabloids until Marie Antoinette. And tabloids do annoy the celebrities. That's why they don't read them. However, back then she didn't know that wonderful trick and she was the queen. So journalist after journalist was being executed. Until she went through about a dozen different journalists or people writing these tabloids, which were basically pamphlets that were handed out around the city that were satire. As we know, we make fun of our politicians today. That wasn't really a good idea back then.
Like a hitman.
So what happened was, she couldn't figure out where it was coming from. But in the gardens, the Jardin des Tuileries, which is the gardens that are just right beyond the Louvre, in between there and the Louvre was a big, wonderful, beautiful palace called the Palais de Tuileries Palace. We'll just put it in my English accent for a second. Okay. Michelle, can you come up a little bit because you're blocking traffic and people almost pushed in the river. So she had one of her henchmen in the middle of the night go out and doing some investigation and found out he was the source of a lot of this guy in the gardens named John the Flair was the source of a lot of these tabloids. He was selling information because he could actually see inside because he was a former monk who was too Catholic and got kicked out of the church, okay, and became a gardener in the Tuileries Gardens. He had access to all the servants and roomers and everything like that inside of the Palace of the Tuileries. Then what happened was this same guard, late at night, went out with a knife and stabbed him in his sleep 84 times. He went down like Rasputin, like a trooper. As he lifted up his blade for the 85th blow, John the Flair looked him in the eye, and 400 years before, and he said, "I'll be back." He stabbed him in the chest, threw his body in the river. He went to the queen and said, "My lady, the job is done." She's like, "What'd you do with the body?" "I threw it in the river, into the Seine. And at that time, there was nothing alive in that river. Guaranteed." So a few nights later, she was sitting in her private study, and her guards were outside her door, and all they could hear her screaming was, "The Red Man! The Red Man! The Red Man!" They broke open, and the queen was white as a ghost. They couldn't figure out what happened. She was muttering and stuttering. And evidently, the Red Man came to her and told her a prophecy. He arrived in a red mist, and his face came out. And he told her that he was John the Flair, because he used to whip his back with, kind of Da Vinci style, Da Vinci Code, remember that? And she was like, "He told me that I would die in the Loire Valley, in my own chateau in 6 months of pneumonia by the hand of Saint Germain." So she couldn't figure out what that meant. And for the next 6 months, she did everything to avoid that outcome. She even brought her own priest with her to the Loire Valley when she got pneumonia, thinking that she could cheat death. Well, her priest mysteriously got ill and had to return to Paris and couldn't stay with his queen. And the only person to give her the last rites was a priest, Saint Germain. Now, the story does not end there because the Tuileries Gardens, the story continues because this Red Man haunted the royal family until the end. Now, the next person to encounter the Red Man was Marie Antoinette. Now, they were put under house arrest inside of the Tuileries Palace before she was brought here to the conciergerie. And the night before she attempted a daring escape, she met the Red Men, who told her not to try to escape. But Louis XVI was determined to go and get help up in Austria, which was technically at the same time Belgium now, where Belgium is. But the Habsburgs own parts of states in Belgium. So they tried to escape and they got caught on the way because Louis decided 10 kilometers before the border to have a picnic. He got arrested and they found a coin that the sheriff had and realized it was actually Louis, not some running marquis. They recognized him by a coin. Some stories say he was sitting in the lodge under a painting of himself, and he got busted. Now, Louis XVI was not the smartest cat in the world, and took him a long time to make a couple errors, but he got around to it. The next person to meet the Red Man was supposedly Napoleon Bonaparte, and he gifted him 12 years of rulership of Europe. And the night that Napoleon went down, he went to the Red Man asking for another 12 years, and the Red Man said, no, that is our agreement. I want to mess with the Bourbons now. Then Louis XVIII, the cousin of Louis XVI, became king. He died of gout 4 days after supposedly seeing the Red Man. Then Napoleon Bonaparte III supposedly encountered the Red Man and was given 20 years to rule Europe, and he became the second emperor of France. And finally, these two theaters, the Hotel de Ville, which is City Hall, and the Tuileries Palace, were all set ablaze during a commune, the Paris Commune of 1872, after the Austrian-Hungarian War. And as the revolutionaries burned the Tuileries Palace down, as you know, it's not there. There's like a missing section of the Louvre. They said they could see a red man coming out of on the balcony, looking at all of them, nodding to them and ascending to the heavens. There hasn't been a French monarch since. And that is the story of the Red Man. Now, however, legend has it, or so politics have it, that there's an attempt to rebuild the Tuileries Palace, but not in Paris, but in Abu Dhabi. It cost $400 million. Who knows? The Red Man might be hanging out in Abu Dhabi with us.